It was November 12, 1986, in a Veterans of Foreign Wars hall in Carmel, California. 130 veterans filled every seat, stood along the walls, packed the small community space that had witnessed decades of military brotherhood. They'd come to hear Clint Eastwood, their mayor and Hollywood's most famous director, speak about his new film Heartbreak Ridge, where he played gunnery Sergeant Tom Highway, a hardened Marine who'd fought in Korea and Vietnam. The audience was filled with real Marines, Korean War veterans who'd frozen at Chosin Reservoir, Vietnam veterans who'd survived Kisan and Hamburger Hill, men who'd actually lived the military life Hollywood portrayed. During the question and answer session, a decorated Korean War veteran named Colonel James Burton stood up with visible effort, leaning on his cane from an old combat wound, and said in a voice that carried absolute authority, "Eastwood, I've watched Hollywood make money off military movies my entire life. Most of them dishonor real soldiers by turning our sacrifices into entertainment. I want to know why you think Heartbreak Ridge is any different." The room went completely silent. Burton was a war hero, respected by every veteran present. His challenge carried the weight of decades of service and sacrifice. Everyone turned to see how Clint would respond. This is not a story about movies or Hollywood or even about defending artistic choices. This is about respecting those who served, understanding that some audiences have earned the right to demand authenticity, and proving that sometimes a filmmaker actually gets it right. In 1986, Clint Eastwood was not just a movie star, and he was also the mayor of Carmel, California, a small coastal town with a significant veteran population. Clint had been elected in 1986, partly because residents trusted him as someone who respected the community's values, including its deep connection to military service. The VFW hall where Clint was speaking had been a fixture in Carmel for 40 years, a place where veterans gathered to honor their fallen, support each other, and preserve the memory of their service. This wasn't a Hollywood premiere or industry event. This was sacred ground for men who'd put their lives on the line for their country. Heartbreak Ridge was Clint's passion project, about Marines, about the warrior culture that kept men fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. The film followed gunnery Sergeant Tom Highway as he prepared a reconnaissance platoon for combat, eventually leading them into action during the 1983 Grenada invasion. Clint had spent months researching the role, talking to real Marines, studying Marine Corps culture and values. He'd insisted on authenticity in every detail: proper uniforms, accurate military protocol, real Marine Corps drill instructors as technical advisors. The film wasn't just entertainment to Clint. It was his attempt to honor Marines specifically and military service generally. But Clint knew that veterans, especially combat veterans, had seen Hollywood get military service wrong countless times. Films that glorified war without showing its cost. Movies that treated soldiers as props for action sequences. Stories that exploited sacrifice for profit without genuine understanding or respect. Veterans had every reason to be skeptical of another Hollywood military movie, even one made by Clint Eastwood. That's why Clint had insisted on speaking at the VFW hall before the film's release. He wanted to face the people who'd actually lived what he was portraying, to hear their concerns, to prove his intentions were honorable. The meeting had been going well for the first 30 minutes. Clint had explained his research process, his use of real Marine advisors, his commitment to authenticity. Veterans had asked respectful questions about specific scenes, about military accuracy, about how Marines were portrayed. Clint had answered honestly, admitting where dramatic license had been taken, explaining the reasoning behind creative choices. The atmosphere had been warm, even friendly. Then Colonel Burton stood up. James Burton was 71 years old and had earned 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Silver Star during 2 tours in Korea. He'd led men in combat, had lost friends, had carried physical and emotional scars for 40 years. He was beloved in the Carmel veteran community, known for his integrity and his fierce protection of military honor. When Burton spoke, people listened, and Burton was not impressed with Hollywood's latest attempt to tell military stories. Eastwood. Burton continued, still standing despite visible difficulty. I've seen John Wayne. I've seen Lee Marvin. I've seen every actor who's played soldier. Most of them did it for the paycheck. They put on the uniform, they fired the blank rounds, they collected their money, but they never understood what it meant to actually serve, to actually sacrifice, to actually lose men you loved. His voice was shaking now, not with weakness, but with barely controlled emotion. I've buried too many friends to watch Hollywood turn their service into entertainment. I've stood at too many graves to applaud actors pretending to understand what we went through. So I'm asking you directly, why should we believe Heartbreak Ridge is different? Why should we think you actually care about honoring Marines instead of just making money off our sacrifices? The challenge hung in the air. Every veteran in that room was watching Clint, measuring his response. This wasn't a reporter asking softball questions. This was a man who'd earned the right to demand answers, surrounded by dozens of others who'd earned the same right. Clint could have gotten defensive. He could have cited his research, his Marine advisors, his commitment to authenticity. He could have argued that he'd done everything right. Instead, he did something unexpected. He stepped away from the podium, walked down from the small stage, and stood at floor level with the veterans, no barrier between them. "Colonel Burton," Clint began, his voice that familiar quiet rasp but filled with emotion few had heard from him. "You're absolutely right to question me. You're right to be skeptical. You're right to protect the honor of the men you served with." Clint paused, gathering his thoughts. "I can't claim to understand what you went through. I never served. I was born in 1930, missed World War II by being too young, missed Korea because I was doing Army basic training when the war ended. I never saw combat. I never led men under fire. I never had to write letters to the families of friends who didn't come home." The room was absolutely silent. "So when I decided to make Heartbreak Ridge, I knew I had a responsibility, not to make money. I've made plenty of money, not to create entertainment. I've made plenty of movies. My responsibility was to honor Marines without pretending to understand what you've actually experienced." Clint's voice was shaking slightly now. "I spent 6 months talking to real Marines, gunnery sergeants, lieutenants, enlisted men. I asked them to tell me the truth about what it means to be a Marine, not the recruiting poster version, the real version, the brotherhood, the sacrifice, the loss, the pride, the cost." He looked directly at Burton. "One Marine I talked to, a Vietnam veteran named Richard Stone, told me something that changed how I approached the entire film. He said Hollywood always gets the action right and the men wrong. They show us fighting, but they don't show us caring about each other. They show us winning battles, but they don't show us mourning the men we lost. If you want to honor Marines, show us as human beings who love each other, not just warriors who fight." Clint's eyes were visibly moist now. "So that's what I tried to do. Gunnery Sergeant Highway isn't a superhero. He's a broken man, trying to find meaning in his last years of service. He's failed at marriage. He's failed at connecting with the modern Marine Corps. But he succeeds at one thing. He loves his Marines. He protects them. He trains them not for glory, but for survival, because that's what real leaders do." Burton was still standing, still listening, his expression softening. "Colonel Burton, I made this film because I wanted to honor what you did, what all of you did. I wanted young people who'll never serve to understand that Marines aren't Hollywood characters. Your fathers, brothers, sons who chose to serve your country and paid prices most Americans will never understand or appreciate." Clint's voice broke slightly. I can never fully honor what you sacrificed. No movie can. But I tried to make a film where Marines are shown as human beings who care about each other, who fight not for glory but for the men beside them, who carry the cost of service for the rest of their lives. He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many veterans as he could. If I failed at that, if Heartbreak Ridge dishonors your service in any way, I apologize, sincerely and completely. The last thing I want is to profit from your sacrifice without honoring it properly. Colonel Burton slowly sat down. His face showed emotion he was trying to control. Several veterans around him were wiping their eyes. The room remained silent for a long moment. Then a Vietnam veteran in the third row stood up. Mr. Eastwood, I haven't seen your film yet, but I've heard what you just said. The fact that you came here to face us, to listen to our concerns, to admit you can never fully understand what we experienced, that means more than any movie. That shows respect, real respect. Another veteran stood. This one from the back. I'm a Marine. Served 2 tours in Vietnam. I've watched every military movie Hollywood's made. Most of them are garbage, but I believe you tried to get it right. I believe you care. That's all we can ask for. More veterans began standing, one after another. Within a minute, the entire room was on its feet, applauding. Not polite applause, but genuine, sustained recognition. Clint stood there, clearly overwhelmed, trying to maintain composure. Colonel Burton stood again, this time approaching Clint with his hand extended. Mr. Eastwood, I apologize for being harsh. I've spent 40 years watching Hollywood exploit military service. I assumed you were doing the same, but you're not. You actually care. That's rare in your industry. Clint shook Burton's hand, his own hand trembling slightly. I care because you deserve to be honored, not exploited. All of you do. Burton did something unexpected then. He removed one of the medals from his uniform, a bronze star he'd earned for valor in Korea. I want you to have this, Burton said. Not because you earned it in combat, you didn't, but because you've shown respect for those who did. You came here to listen to us instead of expecting us to applaud you. That takes a different kind of courage. Clint tried to refuse. Colonel, I can't accept that. You earned this in combat. I just made a movie. You honored the men who earned medals like this by dying, Burton said. You did it by choosing to care when you could have just taken the money and moved on. That's worth recognition. Please accept it. Clint took the bronze star with trembling hands, clearly moved beyond words. He looked at it, then at Burton, then at the room full of veterans. I will treasure this more than any Oscar or any award Hollywood could give me, because this comes from you, from men who actually served. This means everything. The standing ovation continued for several more minutes. Veterans lined up afterward to shake Clint's hand, to share their own stories, to thank him for caring enough to listen. Many told Clint they'd now see Heartbreak Ridge, with open minds, willing to judge it fairly because they knew his intentions were genuine. Heartbreak Ridge was released in December 1986. The reviews from professional critics were mixed, but the response from veterans and active duty Marines was overwhelmingly positive. They recognized the authenticity in the military culture, the genuine respect for Marine Corps values, the honest portrayal of the costs of service. The film wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and to veterans, honesty mattered more than Hollywood perfection. The scene that resonated most with military audiences was Highway's speech to his Marines before combat. You're Marines. That means when things get tough, you don't quit. You don't abandon your brothers. You fight for the man beside you, and he fights for you. That's what being a Marine means. Veterans recognized that sentiment as authentic. That's what real military service was about. Not glory, not heroism for cameras, but brotherhood and sacrifice. Clint had captured something genuine. Years later, the Marine Corps would use clips from Heartbreak Ridge in recruitment materials and leadership training. recognizing that despite dramatic license, the film captured essential truths about Marine Corps culture. That recognition from the actual military meant more to Clint than any box office numbers. Colonel James Burton passed away in 1994. At his funeral, attended by hundreds of veterans and community members, Clint Eastwood gave the eulogy. He wore the Bronze Star Burton had given him 8 years earlier. Jim Burton taught me that earning respect from veterans means listening to them, not telling them what they want to hear. He challenged me to prove my intentions were honorable. He demanded that I care about honoring service, not exploiting it. And when I proved I cared, he gave me the greatest honor I've ever received: acceptance into the brotherhood of those who served. Clint paused, his voice breaking. I'll never be a veteran. I'll never have earned the right to truly understand what Jim and his brothers experienced. But Jim taught me that honoring them means recognizing that fact, respecting their sacrifice, and never pretending to understand what I haven't lived. The veterans who attended that VFW Hall meeting in 1986 still tell the story. They talk about how Clint came to face them instead of avoiding uncomfortable questions, how he admitted he couldn't fully understand their experience, how he let them challenge him without getting defensive, and how he accepted a Bronze Star from a war hero with humility and genuine emotion. That night changed how I see Hollywood. One Korean War veteran said years later, Clint showed us that sometimes, rarely, someone in entertainment actually gets it, actually cares, actually tries to honor instead of exploit. He didn't have to come to that VFW hall. He didn't have to face Burton's challenge. He didn't have to admit his limitations, but he did all those things because he respected us. That's the difference between an actor playing soldier and a filmmaker honoring service. Today, Heartbreak Ridge is shown at Marine Corps bases, used in leadership discussions, and beloved by veterans despite its dramatic liberties. The film endures not because it's perfectly accurate, but because it's genuinely respectful. And the story of that VFW Hall confrontation remains legendary among military communities. The night Clint Eastwood faced down a room full of real warriors, admitted he couldn't match their experience, and earned their respect through humility rather than bravado. The Bronze Star Colonel Burton gave Clint that night sits in a place of honor in Clint's home, not with his Oscars or Golden Globes, but in a private space where Clint keeps things that actually matter. Because to Clint, that Bronze Star represents something more valuable than any industry award: recognition from those who served, that he tried to honor them properly. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who served, someone who remembers when honoring veterans meant more than lip service, and someone who understands that the greatest respect comes from admitting what you don't know rather than pretending to understand what you haven't lived. Have you ever witnessed genuine respect between civilians and veterans? Share your memory in the comments.